As a start, let's go back to Leviticus 14, right? I want to highlight to you the 2 7 days. Why were the lepers asked to kind of wait 7 days and then show themselves to the priest, and then another 7 days, and you realize it's all in number of sevens. And of course, we know that God created the world in 6 days plus 1, the resting day. That's how we get the week, right? That's the basis of the week. But is there any biological reason as well, right? Because again, don't forget that God created all of us, everything. So he has the rules. So, what is interesting is when you are first exposed to, in this case, right, these examples for dengue, you have to wait 7 days for your antibody levels to come up. And this is the reason why you also see for vaccines, a lot of them are in orders of 7. And even for SARS, right, 7 days, right? If you were around in 2003, you remember they will monitor you for 7 days. And for COVID, it became 14 days, right? And so on and so forth. Now, for HIV, of course, it's a bit longer, but in general, the immune system response, okay, have detectable antibodies within 7 days, 14 days. So your booster shot for your vaccines also, again, in following this. So in this chart, you can see, right, on 7 days, this thing called IgM, which is an antibody, starts to come up. And on top, you can even see what we call T-cell immunity starts to be detected, and so on and so forth. And then you wait. So this is very interesting from a scientific point of view, that again, Leviticus written around 3,300 years ago is still very relevant to us today in how our immune response. So I'm going to give a little bit about the design of antibodies, because a lot of drugs that you take right now, and I know drugs often, to people, they consider it as cocaine and so on. In this case, we use it as medication, okay? So medication drugs. So the antibodies, they are very important because throughout the day, throughout our life, we have a lot of mutations that happen in our body because of the food we eat, because of exposure to certain chemicals, and so on and so forth, right? And it is the immune system in our body that's keeping in check all of this. And of course, viruses, I'm sure you will know, and it forms part of the reasons why we get vaccinated, because we want to raise the correct antibody against the correct virus or bacteria or BCG, like some of us have BCGs. And there are 5 major classes of antibodies, and they all have very distinct roles, structures, and functions. So if you see in the news, right, they recently say, oh, they did serological tests, okay, of whether you're recovered from COVID or not. Serological tests, many of them, not always, many of them test the antibodies that are specific for it. So this is a shape of an antibody, a typical Y shape, right? And it's, of course, quite complex. And what it does, it recognizes the bacteria or virus. Sometimes we call it antigen, right? But to generate the antibody, the body has if you saw about genes, so this system here can create 10 to the power of 11, which means there are 11 zeros after the 1 possibilities. So it can bind to that many possible different bacteria, viruses, you name it, or even cancer antigens, and so on and so forth. Okay, and there's a lot of deletion. So the genes get deleted, they combine, and so on. And this is happening within all of us in our immune system, immune cells, right? And there is a lot of precision here. Yeah, there's a lot of precision. I want to kind of make it clear that you cannot delete as and when you like. There are barriers that you delete and combine. And this so-called randomness, right, generates these possibilities. But this is randomness with rules and regulations. And so this system, the results are your antibodies. So how can you be vaccinated against different kinds of viruses, different kinds of diseases, is through this system that's generating. And it generates all the possibilities within a very short period of time. And there are many ways of classifying them. There's very different names. I don't want to go into too much details. But what is difficult here is how would such a system evolve by itself? it is a clear form of design because within its combination, if you do more, do less, sometimes you get errors. And you have to make sure that you do it following specific rules. So it's a form of an engineering system that the body naturally has. So I'm just going to show you a quick video of what happens, right, and what we do in antibodies generating from responses to certain things. Essentially, what happens is, when you are then exposed to viruses or bacteria or anything that's in the environment, and we do have a cell that then produce. So this is the yellow bit that you can see is called an antibody. And the cell does respond, and then it starts to increase in numbers. So every cell has a specific antibody, and if you encounter the right kind, it will then produce much more of it, right? And the other cell is the T cell, right? So this is your typical immune system, and what they both do is that they help to keep your body in check, which is sometimes when you see the recent cases, they talk about anti-vaccines or production that either increases the B cell or the T cell. Okay, so this is the details of things. And you can see that this is how the antibody genes are being formed and how they are put together and cause kind of like a structure. So it has to have a specific Y-shaped structure, and then it does its job, right? So these are the genes. You can see the little blocks are just to show you the different kinds of genes. And what they will do is they will be cut and then they will combine. Okay, so this is a combination system, and it has to be cut at specific regions. So how does a dumb molecule, okay, a stupid molecule without any intelligence, know where and when to cut and combine? This, again, like I said, is evidence of intelligence behind the design. Okay, so we have the V, D, J genes here, and what they will do is they will remove the duplicates, and then they will combine. Okay, so the video is showing you that there are possible combinations that can come together. Okay, and this possibility of them coming generates that 10 to the power of 11, so 11 zeros at the end of it. And then they combine. Okay. Okay, so you can see how it works is the gene will fold up, it will be cut off, and you'll be bound, right? And different parts that will happen during the generation of this diversity. The problem with this is it also generates genes that sometimes bind to your healthy cells. Okay, that's why you get autoimmune diseases. But the body, if it's functioning normally, it will have a system to select out those that will cause problems to the human body. We don't want it to bind to our own cells, and therefore the body attacks itself. When the body starts attacking itself, that's where you have something like diabetes type 1, right? Where the antibodies start to attack the pancreas cells and kill them off. Okay, so these are examples. Within each of these DNA structures, there are regions that you then have to also cut away. You can see the white strings in between, and then you put them together. So you see, this is a sequential problem. Huh? You can't just change the order as and when you like. And then you have the mRNA, and then you can start to have all the formation. Okay, so your cell has all of these protein building blocks that then makes them. You can see that the line is coming out, its RNA is coming out, and then it's going to go towards the whole process of being synthesizing towards antibody. Okay, you can see this is the process. Okay, so it's similar to the video that you've seen earlier on the how the RNA get made into proteins. And so just out of interest, for example, the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines are RNA, and this is what it does, right? Once it enters a cell, it then produces the protein. But in this case, I'm showing it produces an antibody. You can see the Y shape now starts to form, and then it goes through a fixing system. So think of it like a whole production factory where you have the instructions, and then you have the kind of modifications, the packaging, and now it's being packaged, and then it's being sent out to the outside the cell, and that's where the antibody is being produced. So your body is producing, see, it's being released out of the cell now. Your body is producing thousands of molecules per cell, right? Per minute, per second, right? And so this is how they circulate around the whole body to make sure that you are being protected. Okay, in this case, it's stuck on the cell surface, and then it allows it to be recognized. Now, I know it's a lot to take in, but I do actually want you to kind of realize that it is an extremely complex system that follows laws and rules and orders. And these are the parts of the antibody that dictate what it does. Okay? And the same goes for the T cells. So you can see the antibodies are this Y shape. If you look at it in a different way, I have this animation on the right that shows that there's this different ways of showing them. But every loop has a row. Okay, it's not random. If they have a row and you change a bit of them, they can fail to function the way they should. Okay, so just to give you an example, right? So you want to use an antibody at the top of Waldo or Wally, right? You see the red part, it will find the red part within the body, right? And then you can see at the left, right near Wally's hand, right? You can see there are stripes. So the antibody, that region dictates what it finds. So if you are looking for, say, COVID-19, then you need to raise antibodies with that region that recognizes. So you can imagine that you only recognize that. And then you look at the shoe, right? You have the color. So you will find the specific parts of it. Okay, so that's how antibodies work. So in vaccine, you need to expose your cells to the first bacteria or the first virus first time, and then it generates something that can recognize it. Okay, and antibodies, even though you have the same parts that can recognize, they can come in varying different shapes and structures. So here are just some of the 5 common types that happen in the body. Okay, and they all have very different roles. They can have different effects. If you happen to have the app, that the AR, you can use this to generate the AR, but I know it's a bit of a job to do to try. And then you can rotate and you can see that there's a fixed order of its shape. So there's a combination, any misfunction won't let it to work. So one example of such an antibody drug is called Herceptin. So it's against breast cancer. But all of these loops are very, very important. Okay, they are not random. Some of them can bind to bacteria. I'm going to show you an example of what probably would have happened. So this is one of these antibodies. They float around within your blood cells. You can see that the region that recognizes it would then bind to it. But this is one particular type of antibody called IgM. So it has 5 parts, and what happens is it can bind to 5 different viruses at the same time, and you have a clump. Okay, and then another one works differently. This is the secondary antibody, what we call the one after the first 7 days. This one will be binding specifically, right? Again, the top part where it binds is going to be similar against whatever it is. And then the white blood cell will bind to the antibody and eat the whole thing up. Okay. So that is how vaccines, in the end, protect you through your immune system. And this is just one possible way that the COVID-19 ones will work. But the same antibodies can also have problems if they are of the wrong type. Okay, so this is a mast cell, which is a cell that's present in asthmatics and allergic people. I'm asthmatic, and you can see that the antibody sits on the cell, and when pollen or something comes, it then causes it to activate together, right? And what you then see is the cell will be releasing chemicals into the bloodstream and into the surrounding tissues, and it will cause all the inflammation to happen. And what happens is you will get a whole lot of white blood cells coming in, right? So the key that I'm trying to show you is, the binding region, the part where it binds, will of course be determining what it binds to. So in Waldo, right, whether it's the arm or the leg or the shoe or the head. But it's the structure of the antibody that matters. Now, it's very technical, I understand, but you think about how it can be formed. So one key thing is that every kind of antibody has its rule and has its order. And therefore, you cannot remove even a part of it. The difficulty is how is it possible that you can have selection pressures or slowly evolve something like this over a long period of time, because the mechanism for generating such diversity is extremely big, right? And so from here, you make a mistake, the system will not work, and this is extremely crucial. So this is from a Christian faith perspective of how things are moving, that this is actually a proof of design rather than pure randomness. So the key that I want to kind of mention here is that it is too complex, right? Some of you probably, like they say, catch no ball, right? To what I've just kind of described. And it is because it does take a lot of studying of how all these things work and many years of research to get it to understand how these antibodies work. And we are still doing it. The key is even the change in precision of how you combine the genes, how you splice the genes out after you're done, how they are exported, they all form a factory process that is definitely evidence of intelligent design as opposed to pure randomness. It is very difficult, and if you're familiar with Michael Behe, who was one of the first few people in the US to start the intelligent design idea, or rather the evidence of it, he called it irreducible complexity. That means there are some complexness within the body system that you cannot remove even a little bit of it. And what I want you to really be familiar with is that all of them have an order. You cannot go to step 3 before you do step 2. You have to follow 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And there is a lot of implication from the nucleotides and DNA level all the way up. And don't worry if you don't get it, but I just want you to be confused sufficiently for my next part. So my next part is to show you that there is evidence of this design. And some people may say, well, I'm not convinced. And this is where the evidence is, right? In this game, I actually have a real life version of it. I'm holding it right now, right? You can come and play with it, but I think I'll probably see you a very long time later. What you do, right, is this is a game that psychologists use to kind of study cognitive abilities such as intelligence, strategy, planning, memory, and is included in a test. How the game works is you can only move one disk at a time, right? One disk at a time. But you cannot put a bigger disk on top of a smaller disk. So you do have to follow the rules. You can see the animation as well. So there is a rule. And you want to move from this extreme end to the other extreme end, right? So legend has it that the temple in India has 64 disks. This is just a 9. This is the one that I'm holding is just a 9 disk. The animation is showing only a 5 disk. If you can only move one disk per second, right? The one with 64 disks will take you 585 billion years, okay? Because it will take that many turns. This is a relatively simple game with simple rules, right? It's not that hard to get it. And you got it, I believe, in the last 2 minutes. But you were probably still confused about how antibody genes were formed, right? So just to give you that comparison of the complexity in the antibody system, in the virus system, and how this game actually works. This is a video of someone performing on a 9 disk, and you can see, right, that, sorry, I don't know why the video is not playing. But what you do see is that a very simple game with very simple rules, but taking a lot of steps, would already take 585 billion years. The universe is only 14.5 billion years according to atheists. So even in the universe timeline, you are not able to even get to 1/10 of this game to solve it, okay? So this is just a comparison for you to see. This picture here is actually a motor protein that is essentially in all of life. All of life has this protein called ATP synthetase, and it generates the necessary energy to keep you and I alive to do what we are doing on a daily basis, right? So there are some rules that it has to follow. Certain chemicals must go to certain places, and certain chemicals must be formed in a certain specific way. If I didn't tell you there was a protein, you pretty much believe me if I tell you that this is a model from an engineering component, right? Maybe from the new water process, and so on and so forth. You would believe if I didn't tell you that it was a protein. This is it. There are specific subunits that how it is formed. And this is for life, right? So, I want you to think about the complexity between the game, the systems that I've told you, how a game with these 64 disks at 1 second per move would take 585 billion years. That's already 570 years more than the age of the universe. So it is very clear that if you use the same logic and measure that the psychologists are using to determine whether you are intelligent, why isn't our body system, why isn't the nature that we see around us that God created evidence of God's creation? I believe that's a very, very, very clear argument there, right? And by saying that everything random, you can get it, is essentially flicking ink onto a piece of paper and hope that they form a whole page of words. You can have all the time that you want, 585 billion years and more, and you are still not going to form information in the same manner. So the simplest living bacteria, someone was asking about difference in bacteria and viruses, the simplest living bacteria, which is believed to be likely the first self-sustaining life, already has mathematically this much information, okay, encoded. No one is going to look at a computer code, those of you who do a little bit of programming, and say that it's all random if the program is working. If you randomly type a code, it's not going to work. What we recently found over last year was that through some of my interns, we looked at the genetic code. So the genetic code is what I showed you, the rules that are governing from DNA to RNA to protein, right? So when we studied the genetic code, we realized that there are fixed probabilities from how one change can change to the other. Now, it's a very complex, I'm not going to go into details about it, but every time you see a code, you have to recognize that there is some intelligent design in it. Now, none of my staff are believers, and none of them are definitely creationists in this form. But even they can, after they do the mathematical calculation, they cannot refute. So again, this is where I think the very clear version, a very clear application of they are actually without excuse. You really have to do a lot of mental gymnastics to not recognize the design. So if you show someone a water pump and they say, oh, it randomly happened by itself, you have to look at the protein that I showed you earlier on, right? And the code itself, the genetic codes, what's differing between you and me as human beings are very, very minute. They are extremely small. And the change, how it changes at the right place, the right time, is not just place, it's also time. It's all kind of hard-coded, right? So in that sense, there is evidence of a design. So like I said, right, whatever games that I showed you just now, these, if they can be used for intelligence, demonstration of strategy, they are much simpler than what you have seen, right? The irreducible, complexity of viruses, antibodies, and biological systems show creation. You might be, like they say, catch no ball about the antibody system, right? But what I can tell you is that what I show you is a very, very simplified version of what antibodies do. It's actually far more complex than that. Now, if anyone wants to say, let's include, this is how God made, using evolution, the whole universe and whole world that we know about. If you go by the game itself, right, a simple game will take 585 billion years. So how fast does God have to speed up evolution to make all the diversity that we see today, to form a human being, right? So if God did use evolution, again, your timeline doesn't match. Because 585 is already, you know what you're doing, you know what steps to take, you know how to shift, and you know how to move, right? So even without randomness in the evolution process, you still cannot form the universe or world as we know it within the timeline that the atheists have said. Okay, I want to make this very clear because many people will say that, well, it's still possible, we've given a long period of time. But no, if you know exactly what you're doing, it still takes much more time than 585 billion years, based on a simple game with a simple set of rules with 64 disks. What this actually in fact demonstrates that God didn't use evolution to create. Information and planning pre-existed the existence of all of this because, you know, when you play a game, you know how to move. You're not going to take time to go and figure out how to do it, and God definitely doesn't need to take time to go and figure out how to create. He's not trial and error. Oh, I think I made a mistake, I'm going to do something else. He's not going to do that, right? He already knows. So the information would have pre-existed in God's plans, right? And therefore, you see in Genesis the word reshith, the original Hebrew reshith, versus the John's Gospels arche, right? Translated in English in the beginning, and it's not very clear there because of the English language inability to differentiate the true meaning of the word. But the Chinese Bible has the word qi chu and tai chu. So if you look at the John's Gospels in the beginning, tai chu or arche is actually pre-existing or way before Genesis reshith. Okay, so the word could create because the word was already there or way in the beginning. So there is again an order. Again, order does matter. And from the whole game, one thing that is very, very clear is God does not need millions or billions of years. So theistic evolution or guided evolution or whatever new form that is being mentioned by any theologian that subscribes to evolution has fallen apart with that simple game, right? You cannot speed it up that fast. And if you want to speed it up, then why call it 6 days? So definitely the Bible is very clear that all of creation happened within the 6 days. How long each particular animal was made, of course, Bible didn't give us to that detail, but they all happened in a very short period of time. Okay? And don't forget, this is a God who created time. I know when I say that God is the one who created time, there will be people who say that maybe God used a different timeline, a time consistency in the first few days versus the 6th day and so on and so forth. But if you look at the Bible, Genesis again is very clear. There is always an evening and a morning. It was always described very clearly, evening and a morning, right? Whether it is still 24-hour days before the sun was created, is also answered very clearly because there was light already in the beginning, right? So we have to be very clear that if you study the Bible per se in detail, it is not billions of billions. It's not like the first day is actually a few million years and then the time changes over periods of the days. Okay, it's a consistent 24-hour period. The day before the sun was created were plants. How do plants survive without the sunlight for extended periods of time? It has to be within a 24-hour period. So why, again, as I mentioned in the beginning, right, the whole idea of creation being part of the gospel, it lays the foundation for the whole gospel, right? You don't just take it out and then just go straight into the climax, right? Creation puts God back at the focus because all of us, we have to recognize a lot of theological understanding matters here. It is not a separation of our soul and our flesh in that sense. You see, a lot of things that we see in the Bible, they have references made to what we can see, what our senses are made. When Jesus cursed the fig tree, why? Because there was a point that he was trying to make, right? And the cleanliness laws in Leviticus, there is both a physical, if I must use the word, physical human aspect as well as a spiritual point that God is trying to tell us. So creation is corrupted, but God did not abandon it. He's still in charge of the whole situation. And therefore, then you can appreciate the miracle, right? Where how God, being the creator, right, became part of creation as the Lord Jesus Christ that we know. This is a big miracle because something that's outside of creation became part of creation. So the creation, biblical creation, explains the observation that we see of the diversity of life around us because God created them all. You're not going to evolve things within 14 billion years if you are going to take so much time to even make the first gene or first protein. So your first cell, as you can see, right, it has a lot of orders, it has a lot of rules and regulations that it has to follow. It is a powerful testimony of the power of God. And only God can do something from nothing. Okay, and it is possible because God already knew what he was going to do, and he did it, and is showing that an unlimited God. So creation testifies that the power of God comes together with the wisdom of God. Genesis tells us our origin, that we are from God. It is very important because it affects not only our theology, how we view sin, worldview, life, and purpose. If you recognize that you are all of us are children of sons and daughters of Adam and Eve, following that, Noah and his sons, right? We are all from that lineage. There is really no basis for racism, right? If you think about the problem of racism, part of it came from, if you look at the history, part of it came from believing that one race is less evolved than the other, right? They are more primitive, they are less sophisticated, they are less advanced. And that is an evolutionary worldview of things, right? So this is another example of how very subtle belief in your worldview can affect the way you look at things completely, right? Racism is one very current situation that the world is facing, right? But we are all created by God under the order of Adam, Eve, Noah, and his 3 sons, and so on and so forth. There is no more evolved, less evolved, more primitive, more advanced life forms within the human race. So we are all one race, but it's just that we kind of classify it, separate it based on culture, and so on and so forth. Why do we have problems? Why do we have bad things like the pandemic? Why do we have bad things like death? Why do we have diseases and all this? These are all because of the fall. And again, if you think about it, why Adam could kind of name all the creatures within a day, right? Of course, there were probably less creatures than we have because it was all followed by kind, the bracket of kind, which is a bigger word than what we call species today. He obviously, at one glance, he could understand the physical properties or features of each different animal. So he could name them very quickly. We are still naming viruses today, right? COVID-19, for example, is a name that we give to viruses. So man still has authority. So the dominion that God gave to human beings is still in place to an extent, albeit in a fallen, corrupted world, right? Please don't go to the zoo, run into the cage and tell the lion, I command you. That lion will probably take you out very quickly. Because of our fallen, because of the state of our fallen nature, we have lost some of this authority, but we still, in general, we are still the dominant species, if I must, in this world. And we are all degrading towards the Lord Jesus' second coming, right? All creation is groaning in pain. Why is this? Because of the fall. As you get older, as you feel your knees and your hips, as you feel the wrinkles, as you see your hair turning white, these are all because of the fall. Aging is a process that reminds us that we are in a fallen state, right? It is not the original intention when God made Adam and Eve before the fall for men to age, right? We are all degrading, okay, aging towards death. But we are waiting for the second coming, because when that happens, all creation, including us, will be restored to a non-degrading state. So if you cannot fully comprehend and actually we cannot fully comprehend what life was like before the fall, right? Because we cannot imagine how things will be like. So before the fall, Adam and Eve in Garden of Eden would be telling you what the restoration when in Christ's millennium kingdom would be like. So you see, it affects your theology. If you believe that there was death before the fall, then you have a logical break when you're trying to understand the future new heaven and earth. Okay, so this is the key that I kind of want to bring. And by studying whatever discipline that you are in, and you understand how complex how nature is, right? Like I've shown some of you how wonderful and the antibody generating system is, even the viruses, right? How unique and how mathematical some of the designs come about. You understand what Psalm 139 is saying, and you know, and this song was made without knowing all of the details that you knew today. So you see, as we know more in our physical world, we know we have actually less and less excuses that we can have about expecting things to be random. Okay, so we are fearfully and wonderfully made. I've just only shown you two aspects of what we know about in terms of the human body and the world around us, and it was already truly fearfully and wonderful, right? And so we have to have the view back that the Bible is definitely correct. There is no doubt about it, and reinterpret the signs that we see and think about it and make a difference where we are. That's how we can be the salt and light to show in whatever we are doing, and always checking back with the Bible. Because you see, the Bible is inspired by God. I think most of us know this very well. And you have Exodus 20:11, where it's written by the very finger of God, right? So how can God be wrong if he says in 6 days and talks about Sabbath day, right? So, and this 6 days is not like a changing period of time. It's fixed, same, consistent period. So put Genesis back, please. Understand that it follows on with rebellion, which again, many people who recognize creation, they forget at the fall. And then they ask why God allowed this, why God allowed that, bad things, because they forgot that the fall. We are the ones who did the wrong to God. And again, you know, you may run into people who, when you evangelize, they say, well, why can't God show himself to me so I definitely believe? Why doesn't God manifest himself like he did in the days of old? Well, you know, we don't actually have the right. We don't have the right to ask God to tell God what to do to reconcile with us, because we are the offender, not God, right? So again, you know, it goes back to the theology at the fall that happens. So if you are the one who made the mistake, you are the one who has to make amends. But God, in his mercy and grace, gave us the Lord Jesus Christ, right? So that's where the great sacrifice came. And why is it so good? Because he is not the offending party, but he made the huge, you know, if I use the word concession, as in he stepped down in that sense to us, right? To reconcile with us. So it's our fault, but God made the concession to us to allow us to get to reconcile with him in the Lord Jesus Christ. So you see, again, if you have theistic evolution, it slowly erodes all of this, which is why we have to understand, and we do have to study. I'm not saying you need to study science again. Some of you may say it's so complex. Do I need to know this to evangelize or to be a good Christian? No, you don't need to know how antibodies work. You don't need to know how viruses work. You don't need to know how vaccines work. I'm upfront about it. But for those of us who are working in a certain discipline, we need to know the answers in order to apply to what we are doing. We need to know the Bible very well. We need to be able to, then we can apply it in our daily lives. And if you don't have the view of a perfect world that is broken down because of sin, you don't have a good view. It's almost impossible for you to have an understanding of what restoration means. And you know, the church, the Bible, the faith is under attack at every point in time. That is creeping. I showed you how evolution is a very, very subtle movement. It's not as obvious as trying to come up with heresies of the nature of Christ or the Spirit or other things. But you can see that it slowly erodes because it's so prevalent in all the fields. And you sometimes, right, hear the word being used evolve very loosely, right, by even preachers or even by church Bible-believing Christians. Now, of course, it's just a manner of speaking. Sometimes we say the situation is evolving, right? Like the COVID situation is evolving. But let us also bear in mind that we do have to be careful of which words that sometimes we have to use, because it's not technically evolving, because there's no massive change and selection pressure in some of the circumstances that we describe. And we have, like I said, the whole attempt to bring back the biblical creation into the gospel is sometimes even attacked by the church people themselves. As you can see in the castle on the right, the guy is shooting his own foundation by theistic evolutionists, because people compromise and they buy into ideas that, okay, I agree there's intelligent design, but God still used evolution. Again, I showed you the timeline doesn't fit. What we need to do is we need to start repairing the foundation. We have to know, like I gave you quite a lot of examples about the fall and creation underlying a lot of our understanding. And then we can defend within the church, right? Why must be a couple between male and female? Why can't we have more than one wife? Why can't we male and male, female and female, and so on and so forth? Why can't male and animals? Because all these are already dictated within the Genesis context, right? And so this is what we actually need to wake up and do and defend the Bible in that sense. And of course, we need to be able to give an answer, but within the framework that we know that the Bible is correct, because it's God's word, and therefore it cannot be wrong, so it answers all of this. And we have to always check back, okay? And we have to cast these imaginations down, because the Bible did give us the answer, and only when we can do this, for some of the people who are really, really struggling with their faith because of their nature of the work that they do or their education, then they can really come to worship with their mind removed of all of this vain imagination, and they can fulfill to their best, loving the Lord thy God with all thy mind. And so I'm going to end here and say that, creation is very clear. The world around us tells us very clearly, you look at the viruses, you look at the antibodies, that we are all created by God. And all of this testifies not only just the power, the mercy, but also the restoration that we are going to have.
Bible Witness Media Ministry, a ministry of Gethsemane Bible Presbyterian Church, Singapore. Acts 1:8, and ye shall be witnesses unto me.